Park Ranger. Sarah Mitchell had been patrolling the remote backcountry trails of Yellowstone National Park for 15 years, but she had never encountered anything that defied explanation, quite like the discovery she made on the morning of October 12, 2024. Deep in the thoroughfare region, nearly 40 miles from the nearest road, and accessible only by horseback or on foot, she found a campfire that was burning steadily, despite the fact that no human being had been reported in that area for over 2 decades. The fire itself wasn't particularly large, maybe 3 feet in diameter, but it burned with an intensity and consistency that seemed impossible given the circumstances. The flames danced with a mesmerizing blue-white glow that Sarah had never seen in a natural wood fire. And despite the fact that it had been raining intermittently for the past 3 days, the ground around the fire was completely dry in a perfect circle, extending exactly 10 feet from the flames. What made the discovery even more unsettling was the camp itself. 3 tents were arranged in a triangular formation around the fire, their fabric looking as new and vibrant as if they had been set up yesterday. Inside the tents, sleeping bags were neatly laid out, personal belongings were organized with careful precision, and everything appeared to be waiting for campers who would never return. Sarah immediately radioed park headquarters. "This is Ranger Mitchell in Thoroughfare Sector 7. I need backup and a full investigation team out here immediately. I found something that doesn't make sense." "What's your situation, Sarah?" came the voice of Chief Ranger Tom Bradley, who had been managing Yellowstone's law enforcement operations for over 20 years. "I've found an active campsite with a burning fire, but according to our records, no one has been issued permits for this area in months. The strangest part is that this camp looks like it's been maintained for years, but there's no sign of recent human activity. Within 6 hours, a full investigation team had been helicoptered into the remote location. The team included Chief Ranger Bradley, FBI Special Agent Jennifer Walsh from the Bureau's Missing Persons Unit, Dr. Rebecca Chen, a forensic anthropologist from the University of Wyoming, and Mark Stevens, a wilderness survival expert, who consulted for various federal agencies. "Jesus Christ!" whispered Agent Walsh when she first saw the campsite. "How is that fire still burning?" "Doctor." Chen was already examining the area around the flames with scientific instruments. "The temperature readings are consistent with a normal wood fire, but the fuel source doesn't make sense. There are no logs being consumed, no visible means of maintaining combustion, and the heat signature suggests it's been burning at exactly the same intensity for an extended period." Mark Stevens was studying the camp layout with the trained eye of someone who had spent decades in wilderness environments. "This setup is perfect," he observed. "The tents are positioned to protect against prevailing winds. The fire is located for optimal heat distribution, and everything is organized exactly how experienced campers would arrange a long-term site." "But that's impossible," Chief Bradley said. "We would have records of anyone camping in this area for more than a day or 2. The thoroughfare region requires special permits, and we track every person who enters and exits." Agent Walsh was photographing everything methodically while reviewing a thick file she had brought with her. "Chief Bradley, I need to ask you about something. Do you have any records of missing persons in this area from 2002? Bradley's expression changed immediately. "Why do you ask about 2002 specifically?" "Because I've been researching this location since you called it in this morning. 22 years ago, on October 15, 2002, a family of 4 disappeared while camping in Yellowstone. The Johnson family, David and Maria Johnson, with their children Emma, age 16, and Lucas, age 14. They were never found, and the case was officially classified as unsolved." "I remember that case," Bradley said grimly. "It was one of the biggest search operations in the park's history. We had over 200 searchers covering thousands of acres for 2 weeks. We found their car at a trailhead, but never found their bodies or any trace of their campsite. Dr. Chen looked up from her instruments. Agent Walsh, do you have descriptions of the gear the Johnson family was carrying? Agent Walsh consulted her file. According to the missing persons report, they had 3 Coleman tents, 2 smaller ones for the parents and children, and 1 larger one for gear storage. They were carrying standard camping equipment including sleeping bags, cooking supplies, and emergency gear. Mark Stevens examined the tents more closely. These are Coleman tents, and they match the era. The design and materials are consistent with equipment from the early 2000s, but they're in impossible condition. These should have deteriorated completely after 22 years of exposure to mountain weather. There's something else, Dr. Chen announced, pointing to an area near the largest tent. I'm detecting organic compounds in the soil that suggest human presence, but the chemical signatures are unusual. It's as if the molecular composition has been preserved at the exact state it was in 22 years ago. As the investigation team continued examining the site, they made discoveries that challenged every assumption they had about what was possible in the natural world. The food supplies in the camp were fresh and unspoiled, despite being packaged in containers that bore manufacturing dates from 2002. The sleeping bags showed no signs of wear or weather damage. Even the firewood stacked near the flames appeared to have been cut recently, though the tools found in the camp showed signs of being manufactured 2 decades earlier. This is like finding a time capsule that's still actively functioning, Agent Walsh observed. Everything here is from 2002, but it's all been perfectly preserved. Chief Bradley was reviewing old search reports on his tablet. I've been going through the records from the Johnson family search. The last confirmed sighting was at the Thoroughfare Trailhead on October 12, 2002. They checked in with rangers, filed their backcountry permit, and headed into the wilderness with supplies for a week-long camping trip. What was the weather like during their trip? Dr. Chen asked. According to the reports, it was unseasonably warm for mid-October. Clear skies, no precipitation, perfect camping conditions. The family was experienced. David Johnson was a geology professor at Colorado State University, and the family had been camping in Yellowstone every fall for over 10 years. Mark Stevens was examining something that made him call the others over urgently. "You need to see this," he said, pointing to a journal that was lying open beside one of the tents. "This appears to be a daily log kept by someone in the camp, and the entries continue right up to yesterday." Agent Walsh carefully photographed each page of the journal before reading the entries aloud. The handwriting was clearly that of an adult, presumably David Johnson, and the entries documented daily activities in the camp over a period of 22 years. October 13, 2002, arrived at the site after a 6-hour hike, weather perfect. Kids excited about exploring the thermal features we spotted on the map. Maria found interesting rock formations that suggest geothermal activity nearby. October 14, 2002, strange phenomena around the campfire last night. Flames turned blue-white and seemed to be drawing heat from the ground rather than consuming wood. Maria thinks it might be related to underground thermal vents. October 15, 2002. The fire won't go out. We've tried pouring water on it, removing all the wood, even covering it with dirt. It keeps burning with that same blue-white flame. Kids are scared. We've decided to pack up and leave first thing tomorrow morning. Agent Walsh flipped to entries from years later. March 3, 2015. 13 years now. We've learned to accept that we can't leave this place. The thermal anomaly that trapped us here seems to exist in some kind of temporal pocket. Food doesn't spoil, our bodies don't age, and the outside world continues without us. July 22, 2020. Emma would have been 34 today in the real world. Here she's still 16. We've tried sending signals, leaving messages, even hiking out of the thermal zone, but every time we try to leave, we find ourselves back at the camp the next morning. The fire burns as a marker, keeping us anchored to this specific point in time and space. Dr. Chen was taking readings with increasingly sophisticated instruments. The geological surveys support what this journal describes. There's definitely unusual geothermal activity in this area, but the energy readings don't match anything in our databases. It's as if the ground itself is generating some kind of temporal field. September 10th, 2024. A park ranger passed within a mile of our camp today. We tried to signal her, but she couldn't see or hear us. It's like we exist in a parallel version of this place, visible only under specific conditions. The fire has been our anchor to the physical world for over 2 decades. The final entry was dated October 11th, 2024, just 1 day before Sarah Mitchell found the camp. October 11th, 2024. Tomorrow marks 22 years since we became trapped here. Maria has calculated that the thermal cycle might be weakening. If her calculations are correct, we might finally be able to make contact with the outside world tomorrow. We've prepared everything we can to document our experience. If someone finds this journal, please know that we never stopped trying to come home. The implications of what they were reading left the entire investigation team in stunned silence. If the journal was authentic, and all the evidence suggested it was, then the Johnson family had been trapped in some kind of temporal anomaly for 22 years, aging normally within their isolated pocket of space-time while remaining invisible to the outside world. Agent Walsh, Chief Bradley said slowly, we need to treat this as an active rescue situation, not a missing persons cold case. If this family is still alive somewhere in this area, we have a responsibility to find them. Dr. Chen was studying thermal imaging data from her instruments. The geological readings support the possibility of what this journal describes. There are documented cases of geothermal anomalies creating localized environmental effects that mainstream science doesn't fully understand. Yellowstone sits on one of the largest volcanic systems in the world. It's possible that unique combinations of geological conditions could create phenomena that appear supernatural. Mark Stevens was examining the perimeter of the camp. There's something else you should see, he called out. The boundary of the thermal effect is clearly defined. Step outside this circle and you can feel the normal October cold. Step inside and it's like a perfect September day. The temperature differential is exact and consistent. As the afternoon progressed, the investigation team documented every aspect of the impossible campsite. They collected soil samples, photographed every item in the camp, and recorded detailed measurements of the thermal anomaly. But the most significant discovery came when Agent Walsh found a camera among the Johnson family's belongings. This is a digital camera from 2002, she announced. But it's been modified with additional memory storage and what appears to be solar charging capability. If this has been recording their experience, Dr. Chen carefully connected the camera to her laptop using period-appropriate cables. The device contained over 30,000 photos and videos documenting the Johnson family's 22 years in temporal isolation. The images showed the family aging normally within their trapped environment, celebrating birthdays and holidays, and adapting to their impossible situation with remarkable resilience. Look at this, Agent Walsh said, scrolling through photos from different years. They built additional shelters, created a garden area, and even established what looks like a workshop. They didn't just survive, they created a life within this temporal pocket. The videos were even more revealing. They showed David Johnson conducting scientific experiments to understand their situation, Maria Johnson documenting changes in the thermal phenomena, and their children, Emma and Lucas, growing from teenagers into adults while remaining trapped in the same geographic location. This is from 2015, Dr. Chen observed, playing a video that showed Emma Johnson, now appearing to be in her late 20s, explaining their situation to the camera. She's describing how they've learned to predict when the temporal barrier is strongest and when it might be permeable. In the video, Emma spoke directly to the camera. "If anyone finds this recording, please understand that we're not dead or missing in the traditional sense. We're displaced in time, existing in a parallel version of this location that occasionally intersects with normal reality. The fire is our anchor. As long as it burns, we maintain our connection to the physical world." Chief Bradley was coordinating with park headquarters via satellite phone. "We need a full scientific team out here, including geological specialists and temporal physicists, if such people exist. This isn't just a missing persons case anymore. This is a phenomenon that could change our understanding of reality itself." As the sun began to set over the thoroughfare wilderness, the investigation team made preparations to spend the night at the site. They had established a base camp just outside the thermal anomaly zone, close enough to monitor the Johnson family's campfire, but far enough away to avoid any potential effects of the temporal field. "Tomorrow, we start the next phase," Agent Walsh announced as they gathered around their own fire. "We need to find a way to communicate with the Johnson family if they're still trapped in that temporal pocket. And we need to determine if there's any way to bring them back to normal time." Dr. Chen was studying readings from instruments she had left monitoring the anomaly throughout the day. "The thermal patterns are definitely cyclical," she reported. "There are periods when the energy output increases dramatically and periods when it drops to almost normal levels. If the journal entries are accurate, tomorrow marks exactly 22 years since the anomaly began, which might be significant." Mark Stevens was examining the journal again by flashlight. "There's something else in here I missed earlier," he said. "David Johnson wrote about specific times when they were able to interact with the normal world. October 15th appears to be significant. It's when they first became trapped, but it's also when the temporal barrier is weakest." "That's tomorrow," Chief Bradley realized. "October 15th, 2024. If the pattern holds, that might be our best chance to make contact." As they settled in for the night, each member of the team was acutely aware that they were potentially on the verge of the most significant paranormal discovery in recorded history. The Johnson family campfire continued to burn with its impossible blue-white flame, a beacon marking the location of 4 people who had been lost in time for over 2 decades. But none of them could have anticipated what they would discover when the sun rose on October 15th, 2024, exactly 22 years after the Johnson family had first lit that fire and inadvertently opened a door to a parallel version of reality that would trap them between worlds for over 2 decades. The impossible fire continued to burn through the night, its flames dancing with an otherworldly light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with something far beneath the surface of the earth. And somewhere, in a version of that campsite that existed parallel to normal reality, 4 people who'd been missing for 22 years were preparing for what they hoped would be their first contact with the outside world since 2002. At exactly 6:47 a.m. on October 15, 2024, Dr. Rebecca Chen's monitoring equipment detected the first significant change in the thermal anomaly since the investigation team had arrived. The energy readings spiked dramatically, and for the first time in 22 years, the Johnson family's impossible campfire began to flicker and change color. "Agent Walsh, get over here now!" Dr. Chen called urgently as she watched her instruments register readings that defied conventional physics. "The temporal field is fluctuating in ways I've never seen before." Agent Walsh rushed from the investigation team's base camp, carrying the enhanced communication equipment they had helicoptered in during the night. Chief Ranger Bradley and Mark Stevens were already positioned at the edge of the thermal anomaly, watching as the blue-white flames of the Johnson campfire began to pulse with a rhythm that seemed almost like a heartbeat. The temperature differential between inside and outside the anomaly zone is decreasing, Dr. Chen reported, consulting multiple instruments simultaneously. Whatever force has been maintaining this temporal pocket for 22 years is starting to weaken. As the sun crested the mountains surrounding the thoroughfare region, something extraordinary happened. The air above the Johnson family campsite began to shimmer like heat waves, and for brief moments, the investigation team could see shadows moving within the camp that hadn't been visible the day before. There! Mark Stevens pointed toward the largest tent. Did you see that? Someone just came out of that tent. Agent Walsh immediately activated the high-powered camera equipment they had positioned to monitor the site. Through the telephoto lens, she could see a figure that appeared to be a middle-aged man walking around the campsite, but he seemed to exist in a slightly different visual spectrum, like viewing someone through water. "That has to be David Johnson," she announced. "The build and height match the description from 2002, but he appears to have aged normally. If this is really him, he'd be 67 years old now." Dr. Chen was frantically recording readings as the temporal fluctuations continued. "The dimensional barrier is weakening, but it's not stable. We're seeing periodic windows where their reality and ours are overlapping, but they only last a few seconds at a time." Chief Bradley activated the emergency communication system they had established. "David Johnson, if you can hear this, we are park rangers and federal agents. We've found your campsite and we're here to help you." For several minutes there was no response. Then, impossibly, a voice came through their radio system, faint and distorted but clearly human. Can you really hear us? This is David Johnson. We've been trapped here for 22 years. Are you really there?" The emotion in Agent Walsh's voice was evident as she responded. "Mr. Johnson, this is FBI Special Agent Jennifer Walsh. Yes, we can hear you. We've found your journal and your photographs. We know what happened to you. Are Maria and your children with you?" "They're here," David's voice came through the radio, clearer now as the temporal field continued to fluctuate. "Maria is 66 now, Emma is 38, and Lucas is 36. We've aged normally inside this pocket, but we've been unable to leave or make contact with the outside world." Dr. Chen was monitoring the communication carefully. "The signal strength varies directly with the thermal fluctuations," she observed. "When the anomaly weakens, their reality becomes more accessible to ours." Over the next hour, as the temporal barrier continued to fluctuate, the investigation team was able to establish intermittent communication with all 4 members of the Johnson family. What they learned challenged everything they thought they understood about time, space, and the nature of reality itself. "The thermal activity beneath this area isn't just geothermal," Maria Johnson explained during one of the clearer communication windows. "David and I have had 22 years to study it. It's some kind of intersection between multiple temporal streams. We think Yellowstone's volcanic system creates unique conditions that can trap matter and energy in temporal loops." Emma Johnson, now a 38-year-old woman who had spent her entire adult life in temporal isolation, provided the most detailed explanation. "We've learned that October 15th is significant because it's when the Earth's position relative to the volcanic system beneath Yellowstone creates optimal conditions for temporal displacement. Every year on this date, the barrier becomes permeable for approximately 12 hours. Why haven't you been able to escape during these annual windows?" Agent Walsh asked. Lucas Johnson, the youngest family member who had grown from a 14-year-old boy into a 36-year-old man while trapped, answered, "We tried for the first 10 years, but every time we attempted to leave the thermal zone during the permeable periods, we were pulled back within hours. It's like the anomaly has a gravitational effect on anything that's been exposed to it for extended periods. Dr. Chen was furiously taking notes and correlating the family's observations with her scientific measurements. "What you're describing sounds like temporal entanglement," she said. "If the volcanic system here really is creating temporal distortions, then prolonged exposure could create a binding effect between consciousness and the specific space-time coordinates." "That's exactly what David theorized after our 5th year here," Maria confirmed. "We realized that escape might not be possible through conventional means. We needed to find a way to weaken the temporal anchor that's been holding us here." The family had spent the last decade developing what they called the Temporal Dissipation Protocol. Using David's background in geology and improvised equipment built from their camping supplies, they had been conducting experiments to understand and potentially manipulate the forces keeping them trapped. "We've learned that the anomaly is powered by a combination of geothermal energy and some kind of resonance between the volcanic system and something else," David explained, "something that might be connected to the broader temporal structure of this region." Agent Walsh was coordinating with park headquarters to arrange for additional specialized equipment. "Mr. Johnson, we have a full scientific team standing by to assist with extraction procedures. What do you need from us to make escape possible?" "The temporal anchor appears to be strongest at the center of our campsite," Emma replied. "That's where the fire has been burning for 22 years. If we can disrupt the energy source that's maintaining the fire, it might weaken the entire temporal field, enough for us to cross back into normal reality." Mark Stevens, drawing on his wilderness expertise, asked, "What kind of energy source could maintain a fire for 22 years without consuming fuel?" "It's not burning fuel in the conventional sense," Lucas explained. "The fire is a manifestation of temporal energy. It's consuming time itself, creating a closed loop that keeps us anchored to October 15th, 2002. But the loop has been gradually weakening as the geological conditions that created it slowly change." Dr. Chen's instruments suddenly registered a massive spike in temporal energy. "The fluctuations are intensifying," she announced. "Whatever window of opportunity we have, it's approaching rapidly." During the strongest communication period yet, David Johnson provided crucial information about the extraction procedure. "We've calculated that the temporal field will be at its weakest point at exactly 3:47 p.m. today, the precise time we first noticed the fire behaving abnormally 22 years ago. If we can coordinate our escape attempt with external intervention at that exact moment, we might be able to break free." "What kind of external intervention?" Chief Bradley asked. "The temporal field is maintained by a specific resonance frequency," Maria explained. "If you can generate a counter-resonance at the moment when the field is naturally weakest, it should disrupt the energy pattern enough to allow us to cross back into normal space-time." Agent Walsh was consulting with technical specialists via satellite phone. "Dr. Johnson, we have access to sonic equipment that might be able to generate the frequencies you're describing. Can you provide the specific parameters?" Emma, who had apparently become the family's expert on temporal physics through 2 decades of study, provided detailed specifications. "The base frequency needs to be 47.3 Hz, modulated with harmonic intervals that match the volcanic resonance beneath Yellowstone. But the timing has to be perfect. If you're off by even a few seconds, the counter-resonance could actually strengthen the temporal field instead of weakening it." As the morning progressed, the investigation team worked frantically to prepare for the 3:47 p.m. extraction attempt. They had brought in specialized acoustic equipment, additional monitoring devices, and a medical team to assist with what could potentially be the most unusual rescue operation in Park Service history. Dr. Chen was coordinating the scientific aspects of the operation when she made a disturbing discovery. The temporal fluctuations aren't just affecting the Johnson family's reality, she announced. I'm detecting similar anomalies at other locations throughout Yellowstone. Whatever created this temporal pocket might not be an isolated incident. What do you mean? Agent Walsh asked with growing concern. I mean there might be other people trapped in similar temporal anomalies throughout the park system. The geological surveys show at least 17 locations with thermal signatures that match what we're seeing here. The implications were staggering. If Dr. Chen was correct, the Johnson family might not be the only people who had been displaced in time by Yellowstone's unique geological conditions. There could be dozens of individuals or families trapped in temporal pockets throughout the park, invisible to normal reality and unable to escape their displacement. We need to focus on the immediate rescue, Chief Bradley decided. Once we've successfully extracted the Johnson family, we can investigate the possibility of other temporal anomalies. At 2:30 p.m., with just over an hour remaining before the critical extraction window, the Johnson family began their own preparations. Through the radio communication, they described how they were dismantling their camp and positioning themselves at the edge of the thermal anomaly zone. We're ready on our end, David reported. 22 years of preparation have led to this moment. Maria has calculated the exact positions we need to occupy when the temporal field collapses. What happens if the extraction attempt fails? Agent Walsh asked, voicing the concern that everyone was thinking. If we miss this window, Emma replied soberly, the next opportunity won't come for another year. And based on our calculations, the temporal field is gradually strengthening. Next year might be our last chance. The pressure was enormous. The investigation team was attempting something that had never been tried before, using theoretical physics that barely existed and equipment that wasn't designed for temporal manipulation. But 4 people who had been missing for 22 years were depending on them for rescue. At 3:30 p.m., Dr. Chen began the preliminary acoustic preparations. I'm starting the base frequency generation, she announced. All monitoring equipment shows normal readings. The temporal field is beginning to weaken as predicted. Through the radio, Lucas Johnson reported, we can feel the change. The air around us is starting to feel thinner, like the boundary between realities is becoming more permeable. 15 minutes to extraction point, Agent Walsh announced, coordinating the timing with military precision. All teams report ready status. Mark Stevens was monitoring the visual aspects of the operation through high-powered telescopes. I can see them more clearly now, he reported. All 4 family members are positioned at the edge of their campsite, just outside the area where the impossible fire is burning. At 3:45 p.m., with just 2 minutes remaining, David Johnson's voice came through the radio with unusual clarity. Thank you for not giving up on us. 22 years ago, we thought we were just going on a family camping trip. We never imagined we'd become lost in time itself. You're going home, Mr. Johnson, Agent Walsh replied. All of you are going home. Dr. Chen began the final countdown. 60 seconds to extraction. Harmonic frequencies are locked and ready. Temporal field is at minimum strength. The blue-white flames of the impossible campfire began to flicker more violently than they had in 22 years. 30 seconds. Counter-resonance generators are active. Through their telescopes, the investigation team could see the Johnson family holding hands at the edge of their temporal prison, preparing to step back into a world that had aged 22 years without them. 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Execute extraction. At exactly 3:47 p.m. on October 15, 2024, Dr. Chen activated the counter-resonance generators with full power. The acoustic waves penetrated the temporal anomaly, creating interference patterns with the geological forces that had maintained the Johnson family's imprisonment for over 2 decades. For a moment that seemed to last forever, reality itself seemed to bend and waver around the impossible campfire. Then, with a sound like the world's largest tuning fork being struck, the blue-white flames suddenly changed to normal orange and red, and the temporal field collapsed completely. In the silence that followed, Mark Stevens focused his telescope on the campsite and announced the words that everyone was hoping to hear. "I have visual confirmation. 4 people are walking toward our position. The Johnson family is free." The first steps that David Johnson took on normal ground in 22 years were hesitant and uncertain, as if he wasn't entirely convinced that the temporal prison that had held his family captive since 2002 had actually released them. Behind him, Maria, Emma, and Lucas followed, each carrying a small pack containing the few possessions they had managed to preserve during their decades-long displacement in time. Agent Walsh was the first to reach them, her professional composure barely containing the emotion of witnessing what was arguably the most extraordinary rescue in modern history. "Mr. Johnson," she said, extending her hand, "I'm Special Agent Jennifer Walsh. Welcome back to 2024. David Johnson, now 67 years old but carrying himself with the weathered confidence of someone who had spent over 2 decades solving impossible problems, shook her hand firmly. "Agent Walsh, I can't adequately express our gratitude. When we lit that campfire on October 15, 2002, we never imagined it would become a 22-year beacon marking our location between worlds." Dr. Chen was immediately conducting medical assessments, amazed by what she was observing. "Physiologically, you all appear to be in remarkable health," she announced after preliminary examinations. "Whatever the temporal field was doing to preserve your campsite, it seems to have had beneficial effects on your physical well-being." Maria Johnson, who had aged from 45 to 66 during their temporal imprisonment, looked around at the investigation equipment with the keen interest of someone who had spent decades studying the forces that trapped them. "The technology has advanced significantly," she observed. "Your monitoring equipment is far more sophisticated than anything we had access to in 2002. Emma Johnson, who had entered the temporal anomaly as a 16-year-old high school student and emerged as a 38-year-old woman with an advanced understanding of temporal physics, was staring at the smartphones and tablets the rescue team carried. "The world has changed dramatically, hasn't it?" she asked with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "More than you might imagine," Chief Bradley replied gently. "We'll help you adjust gradually, but yes, technology has transformed society in ways that would have been unimaginable in 2002. Lucas Johnson, who had missed his entire adult life to temporal displacement, was examining the helicopter that had brought additional rescue equipment. "I was supposed to graduate high school in 2006, he said quietly. "I was planning to study aerospace engineering. I guess I have some catching up to do." As the Johnson family was transported to the nearest medical facility for comprehensive health evaluations, Dr. Chen continued analyzing the data from the temporal anomaly site. What she discovered had implications that extended far beyond the rescue of a single family. The temporal field collapse wasn't an isolated event, she reported to Agent Walsh via secure communication. When the Johnson family's anomaly dissipated, it created resonance effects throughout the entire Yellowstone volcanic system. "I'm detecting similar field collapses at 16 other locations across the park." Agent Walsh felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "Are you saying there are other people trapped in temporal anomalies?" "That's exactly what I'm saying. And based on the energy signatures, some of these anomalies are much older than the Johnson family's displacement. We might be looking at disappearances that date back decades." Over the following 72 hours, as the Johnson family underwent medical and psychological evaluations at the University of Wyoming Medical Center, search teams were dispatched to each location where Dr. Chen had detected temporal anomaly collapses. What they found redefined the scope of Yellowstone's mysteries. At the first secondary site near the Grand Prismatic Spring, searchers found evidence of a camp that had been maintained since 1987. Personal belongings suggested it had belonged to a family of 3 who had disappeared during a Yellowstone vacation 37 years earlier. Unlike the Johnson family, however, no living occupants were found. Only preserved remnants of their presence and a journal documenting 15 years of temporal imprisonment before the entries abruptly ended. It appears that different temporal anomalies have different sustainability characteristics, Dr. Chen explained to the expanding investigation team. Some, like the Johnson families, could maintain human life indefinitely. Others seem to have had limited duration before, whatever happened to their occupants. At the Old Faithful site, search teams discovered something even more extraordinary, an intact campsite containing modern camping equipment and digital devices, indicating displacement from 2019. When rescue teams called out, they received a response. "Hello, is someone there? We've been trapped here for 5 years," came a voice from what appeared to be empty air. The rescue of the Morrison family, 2 parents and a teenage daughter who had been displaced from normal time while photographing geysers, required the same kind of temporal extraction procedure that had freed the Johnsons. Dr. Chen, now working with a team of theoretical physicists hastily assembled from universities across the country, was beginning to understand the broader phenomenon. Yellowstone's volcanic system creates what we're calling temporal instability zones, she explained to a briefing of federal officials, scientists, and Park Service administrators. These are areas where the unique combination of geothermal activity, magnetic field variations, and geological stress can create localized distortions in space-time. The discovery that Yellowstone had been inadvertently trapping visitors in temporal anomalies for decades created an unprecedented crisis for the National Park Service. A total of 7 additional families or groups were eventually located and rescued from various stages of temporal displacement, but evidence suggested that others had been less fortunate. Meanwhile, the Johnson family was undergoing the complex process of reintegrating into a world that had advanced 22 years without them. The challenges were both practical and profound. "I've been studying temporal physics for 2 decades, Emma Johnson explained to Dr. Chen during one of their regular consultations, but I did it using scientific knowledge from 2002. Everything I learned about quantum mechanics, relativity, and dimensional theory is outdated now." David Johnson faced the bureaucratic nightmare of re-establishing his identity and credentials in a world where he had been legally dead for over 2 decades. "My geology degree is from 1979, he said with dark humor. "I'm probably the only person in the world with practical experience in temporal dynamics, but no official credentials to prove it." Maria Johnson was struggling with the emotional aspects of their return. "Our families, our friends, everyone we knew has aged 22 years. Some have died. We're strangers to the people who remember us and completely unknown to everyone born after 2002. Lucas Johnson faced perhaps the greatest challenge. "I'm chronologically 36 years old, but psychologically I'm still processing experiences I had as a teenager. I missed college, career development, relationships, everything that defines normal adult life." The federal government established a special task force to address both the immediate needs of the displaced families and the broader implications of temporal anomalies in national parks. Agent Walsh was appointed to head the Temporal Displacement Investigation Unit, a new division that would monitor and respond to similar phenomena. We've identified over 200 unsolved disappearances in national parks over the past century that exhibit characteristics consistent with temporal displacement, she reported to congressional investigators. We may have been dealing with this phenomenon for decades without recognizing it. Dr. Chen was leading research into methods for predicting and preventing temporal anomalies. The key factors seem to be specific combinations of geological activity, magnetic field fluctuations, and temporal coordinates that align with cosmic phenomena. We're developing early warning systems that could alert park visitors to avoid areas during high-risk periods. 6 months after their rescue, the Johnson family had established new lives that balanced their unique experiences with the realities of modern society. David Johnson was working with the U.S. Geological Survey, applying his hard-earned expertise in temporal dynamics to help identify and monitor anomaly-prone areas throughout the national park system. Emma Johnson had enrolled in graduate school to formalize her self-taught knowledge of temporal physics, becoming the first person to pursue an academic degree in practical temporal dynamics. I want to ensure that what happened to us leads to scientific advancement that prevents others from experiencing the same displacement, she explained. Lucas Johnson was working with online education programs to complete the traditional milestones he had missed, while also serving as a consultant for the Temporal Displacement Investigation Unit. I may have missed living through 2 decades, he said, but I gained knowledge that no one else in the world has. Maria Johnson had become an advocate for families affected by temporal displacement, helping other rescued individuals navigate the complex process of reintegrating into modern society. We're all pioneers in a sense, she observed. We're learning how to rebuild lives after losing decades to forces we barely understand. The Johnson family's impossible campfire, which had burned continuously for 22 years, was extinguished when the temporal field collapsed. But the site was preserved as a research station where scientists from around the world studied the residual effects of prolonged temporal displacement. The Johnson site has become a window into understanding how time itself can be manipulated by natural forces, Dr. Chen explained to a gathering of international temporal researchers. What happened here challenges our fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality. The broader implications of temporal displacement in Yellowstone led to the establishment of new safety protocols for all national parks. Visitors were warned about potential temporal anomaly zones, monitoring equipment was installed in high-risk areas, and emergency response teams were trained to recognize signs of temporal displacement. We now know that nature is capable of creating phenomena that exceed our current scientific understanding, Chief Bradley stated in his final report on the investigation. The Johnson family's 22-year displacement wasn't a supernatural occurrence. It was a natural phenomenon that we simply didn't have the knowledge or technology to recognize. 1 year after their rescue, the Johnson family returned to Yellowstone for the first time since their displacement. Standing at the site where their impossible campfire had burned for over 2 decades, they reflected on the extraordinary journey that had taken them through time and back again. "We lost 22 years of normal life," David Johnson said, looking at the place where their tent had stood in both 2002 and 2024. "But we gained something that no other family in history has experienced. We learned that time isn't the fixed, unchangeable force that most people believe it to be. We also learned that love and family bonds are stronger than time itself," Maria added. "No matter what reality we were trapped in, we stayed together and took care of each other." Emma Johnson, now recognized as one of the world's leading experts in practical temporal dynamics, was continuing her research into the forces that had imprisoned them. Our experience opened up entirely new fields of scientific study, she noted. Temporal physics, dimensional dynamics, chronological displacement, these are all legitimate areas of research now because of what we lived through. Lucas Johnson had found purpose in helping other displaced individuals adapt to their returned reality. Missing those decades was traumatic, he acknowledged, but using that experience to help others gives meaning to what we went through. The Campfire site itself had become a memorial not just to the Johnson family's ordeal, but to all the people who had been lost to temporal displacement over the decades. A simple plaque marked the location. In memory of all those displaced by forces beyond human understanding, and in recognition of the resilience of the human spirit when faced with the impossible. As the sun set over Yellowstone on the anniversary of their rescue, the Johnson family gathered around a normal campfire, one that would burn for a few hours and then fade to embers like campfires are supposed to do. They shared stories about their adjustment to the modern world, their ongoing research into temporal phenomena, and their hopes for preventing others from experiencing similar displacement. The impossible fire that marked our prison for 22 years is gone, David Johnson reflected, watching the normal flames dance in the evening air. But it led to discoveries that will help protect future generations from getting lost between worlds. And it brought us home, Maria added softly. After 22 years, it finally brought us home. The mysteries of Yellowstone's temporal anomalies continued to be studied by scientists around the world, but the Johnson family had moved beyond being subjects of research to become partners in understanding the phenomenon that had defined half their lives. Their experience had transformed them from victims of an inexplicable natural force into pioneers in humanity's expanding knowledge of time, space, and the remarkable resilience of family bonds. The impossible campfire was gone, but its legacy lived on in the scientific advances, safety protocols, and human understanding that emerged from 22 years of flames that burned outside the normal flow of time. And somewhere in the vast wilderness of Yellowstone, other mysteries waited to be discovered by those brave enough to explore the boundaries between the possible and the impossible.